There we go. So, we are continuing our genre examination series. As always, I am Josh Bycer from Game Wisdom, and my co-host from soon to be TM, something not Nexus Games, Sharky.
Yeah, maybe we should just say from not Nexus Games. But yeah, hello everybody. Good to be here as always, and we're one step closer to actually finalizing the name. But still work in progress. But we'll hopefully in another week or two, 3, we'll have it. Hopefully no longer than that.
All right, but we are continuing our "What is a game" or "What is a genre" series here for the Safely Extreme cast. The first episode was, of course, on "What is a roguelike?" A question that has never been asked before in the history of the game industry, right?
No, and definitely never in the history of your YouTube channel.
Mm-mm. And we're going with the second, I guess, most popular question asked: What is a platformer or a platformer? And
You mean question that's never been asked?
mm-hmm.
Because we've never asked what is a platformer.
Nor have we played any here on the stream.
Nope,
Nor did I write a book on platformers as well.
Nope, never. Never,
That's
ever.
that I put into the pre-show sprawl or strawl, whatever it's called now. But the platforming genre is one of the oldest, probably in terms of mainstream audiences, probably the oldest one that mainstream developers and consumers know. It is a genre that has been copied, ripped apart, put back together, altered, changed, made more challenging, made more easier, did everything under the sun with. And
Made badly.
what was that?
Made badly.
Mm-hmm. It is a genre that a lot of people love to turn to for their first game. Be it a runner, be it a Mario like, be it a Crash Bandicoot like, be it a Bubsy like. Just copy Bubsy and you'll succeed, right?
Yeah, there you
But despite its age, despite all the many, many examples that are out there, it's still a genre that I think eludes a lot of developers as to what is a good version and what is a bad version.
I know who could copy a Bubsy and make it succeed.
Nintendo?
Exactly.
I know it's too late, but they really should have put Bubsy in Smash. That should have totally have been the last character.
That'd have been hilarious.
Mm-hmm. But the platforming design is something that it has become one of the most popular templates for new developers, student developers, and whatnot. Because it is a genre that has a very basic framework. You walk to the left, you walk to the right, you jump. There you go, there's your entire gameplay loop. But it is so much harder to do this genre right than I think other genres. Just because there's so many examples of it. It's not a genre like what we see from deck builders, or whatever the hell we want to call it, the Project Moon games, or even stuff like multiplayer, first-person shooters, etc., where do they really have Zool in Smash?
He said they should have.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But I don't think it's necessarily hard. I think that it's hard for a lot of rookie developers to realize that it's not just move left, move right, and jump, and just leave it as super basic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think as a overall the genre is particularly hard. You just have to have the knowledge that you need to have on platformers and realize that just those 3 basic things is not enough to be a good platformer.
Nope, it is
You
not.
you need good feel in all of those aspects, and you need multiple in at least one, if not multiple, of those aspects.
And when Shark is saying good feel, what we're referring to is essentially the essence of platforming, jumping. There are as many different ways of having jump in your game as there are, snowflakes when it's snowing outside. Now, are all of them good? No.
Absolutely not.
And this, I think, this is something I spent a lot of time about in game design deep dive platformers. That how you jump is fundamental. And there are many different ways you can do this. So, if we kind of go in order of how, the history of the platformer developed, the first kind of jumping is the committed jump. That is, I jump, and as soon as my character leaves the ground, I am committed to that angle, good, bad, whatever. This is kind of the age of Ghosts and Goblins. Trying to think of some other well-known examples. We could even argue the first Mario had very, very basic committed jumping as well. And the advantage of committed jumping is that because you are dealing with fixed angles, it makes it far easier to design levels around. If you know that the character can only jump, let's say, this wide of a space, you know where you can fit, how to space your platforms, enemy angles, and so on.
When you were saying this far, what screen were you comparing it to?
I was going with my fingers.
Was that a big screen? Because that would be only one block. Was that a little bitty
could be
TV that would be half third of the screen?
Could be 3 blocks wide. Could be 2 inches on screen, and it's something that you need to figure out as you're building your platformer. And a lot of what goes into feel when it comes to platforming, be it 2D or 3D or whatever, you have to play test this. You need to create a test bed that you can see how your character is behaving and jumping and moving. Because that's it. That's your game.
On your test bed, basically, unless you have any wall jumping or any kind of manipulation with walls kind of thing, you just want a open, flat, full floor kind of thing. And you want to be able to jump around in it and move around in it and it feel good, and responsive, and, that you have the correct feel for what you're going for kind of thing. And if you do have any kind of wall jumping or anything like that, you need to have some walls and a few other things in there, just very basic kind of thing, and just test in that basic form and get that basic form feeling right before you do anything else. If it does not feel right, fun, and good at that point, your game is going to be a wash.
Yep. And this is something that we see especially from indie developers. That they'll try to basically, stack all these different mechanics and elements on top of their platformer, and the platforming itself is horrible or it doesn't feel right. And this is why I said that it is a hard genre to do right, because it is very much the first action or player skill based genre that's out there. And like Shark said, if your jumping is wrong or it doesn't feel right, everything else you have attached to it is not going to work.
It's you have to have a good foundation before anything can built on top of it without collapsing.
Yeah, and that means making sure that your jumping is good. And when we say having that good feel with jumping, what we saw as the genre evolved, and we saw, the later Mario games, Sonic, and so on, was giving you variable jumping. So, based on how long you hold down the jump button, tap it, hold whatever, your character will jump at different heights. You have far more control over it. Some games let you basically stop at pre-specific jump heights. So if this is the floor, if I jump, maybe I'll stop here, if I stop here, or I stop here. And it's all dependent on when the player lets go of A. Now, some platformers, you can stop here, 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 here. It just keeps going down. Like the second you let go of A, your momentum dies. And there is, I think, a line between how much and how little control you want to give. And
what if you just never let go of it and you just fly off the screen?
Yeah, the infinite jump. You have to be very mindful of how much control, because that is going to have a factor into the environment and obstacle design that we'll talk about later. But one of the most surefire ways that I can spot if an indie developer or if any developer does not get what makes a platformer work is that they will build one jump. So basically, if my character's here, if I hit A, they'll do this, and that's it. If I tap A, they go up here. If I hold it, they go there. It's always that one jump, no change. And not only does it really limit what you can do level design wise.
Uh-oh.
Oh, what happened?
Oh, we got connection issues. We got connection issues. And you losing the internet?
No, I'm doing good. I'm not seeing any drop frames. Could it be on your side?
Maybe, but I'm not seeing any drop frames either. But I am seeing your camera die and the stream dying.
Yeah, everything looks good on my side. I'm not noticing anything here on the YouTube chat or stream. Weird.
It's fine now.
I'm getting like a little delay with the Discord, but maybe Discord is acting up a little bit too. I don't know. But back to my thought that the indie developer or any developer, that if you just have that one fixed jump, it kills like variety of environment and obstacle design, and it's just very boring to play. And for all of you watching this live or recorded right now, and just as I said it, like the whole glare just like picked up on my back there. But do you when you see platforming like that, when it's just that one jump and that's it, does that make it interesting for you to play that kind of platforming? Or do you prefer having different kinds of jumps, different kinds of variables?
It definitely has to have different kind of jumps. I don't think it necessarily has to have, like the specific, hold or not hold kind of thing. I personally am not a fan of the holding kind of mechanic, but I definitely have to have multiple jumps, if I remember right, Mario 64 did not have the holding, but it had tons and tons of different jumps. And that's kind of my bread and butter kind of thing when it comes to that kind of platformer. Also, like Mario 3. Mario 3 had different jumps, but it was a lot of it was based off of where your P meter was sitting at, which was based off of momentum.
Yeah.
But it didn't have the hold kind of thing. I don't think, anyway.
I'm pretty sure it did not. Mario, or 3D Mario, it was really built on all these different ways of manipulating Mario. And again, this is one of the reasons why we say that, just be Nintendo has often worked, because Nintendo has been one of the few developers that really got the joy of platforming, be it in 2D or 3D.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo is the king of platformers, essentially.
And the reason why, and why people have tried to imitate them and they failed, One is that they really get the feel right. It is a pleasure to jump around with Mario, Luigi, Wario, anyone else you can think of. And then,
What about Peach?
yep, or hover with Peach.
But you jump and hover with her.
Mm-hmm. We still need Waluigi in a platformer. But they also use that as a foundation for their level and environmental design. That they will challenge you and they'll do very interesting things with their levels. And the other aspect of platformers, it's not just about the jumping. That again is your foundation. You need to build something that's interesting to jump around in.
Like that one song, jump, jump, jump around.
Because, again, it may feel great to jump, but if your entire game is just a flat road with, one background, people aren't going to want to play that for 8 to 10 hours, right?
Even if it's a flat road with 500 different backgrounds, people are not going to want to play it for very long.
And environmental design, or actually this is more specifically level design, is about figuring out different ways to challenge the player. It's not just, okay, here's a room with 10,000 buzzsaws and homing missiles and lasers. Get to the end of the room. You have to make it something that is feasible, and it's got to test the player in different ways.
At least in general, it has to be feasible. I mean, we have seen exceptions to that, like the one we play in multiplayer night all the time.
Well, that's because a certain shark keeps putting black holes everywhere.
You normally the one putting black holes. I'm normally putting, spinning turrets of chaos.
But the difficulty of a platformer is really dependent, again, on how the character is manipulated and what you're putting in that space. Another aspect, again, goes back to the jumping side, is how much control do you give the player in the air? Some games, again, even if it is committed jumping, they may allow you to kind of stop and kill your momentum in the air if you're about to overshoot a jump. One of the things that drives me crazy, and I see this from indie developers, is I will jump, and let's say I'm not holding down left or right. The character will still move in the air unless I course correct it. And this is one of the most important things you have to understand about platforming. Platforming is about control. You never want to take the player's control away from them. Because when you do that, it completely ruins their sense of control and enjoyment of that game.
Well, physics and everything, and similar to physics, would, keep on pushing you in a direction that you were going.
Yeah, but this would be a case where the developer is not compensating for that. They'll make you want to land on, pixel-wide platforms, but you're still not controlling. Actually, what I was also saying is that it's not just them controlling it. Let's say if I'm jumping in the air and I press left, they'll still continue moving in that angle at level. There's no way to make micro adjustments. The character is just always moving while they're in the air. And
I like having the adjustments in there for sure.
And adjusting is an essential point when it comes to more challenging platformers. If you're doing very basic obstacle design or fixed angles, you don't necessarily need a huge amount of micro adjustments. If it's, Super Meat Boy Kaizo level, we're jumping in between, buzzsaws with this much space, you have to give the player a very fine ability to control their momentum. And when you're trying to build a platformer around all these different obstacles, all these different kinds of jumps, it really comes down to what you can get out of the environmental objects you've created, and again, what kind of moves and abilities you give the player. This is why, when we talk about Metroidvania design in a later part of the series, that Metroidvanias introduce new mechanics. Because every mechanic that you give the player is a new thing you can test their abilities and create obstacles around. If all you do is have one single jump, you're not going to get a lot out of that compared to, let's say, Super Mario World, where you not only have the variable jumping, but you also have his normal jump and the spin jump on top of that.
Yeah, or Mario 64, where you have like, what, 10, 15 different jumps?
Oh, yes. And again, this is why Nintendo is considered the king, and it's also why, to be honest, very few developers, both in the AAA or indie space, have ever managed to come close. A lot of people will say they loved A Hat in Time, but The Hat in Time also kind of fell flat for me because it was just very basic platforming.
Mm.
Hello,
The,
V2.
huh?
Oh, no, I'm saying I did a chat.
Oh. But I think that, with platformers, you really do need like multiple jumps because, like,
Mm-hmm.
even if you have like different jump heights and everything, I think that a lot of times really limits you, and like I think, I think that's part of the reason why I don't care for Super Meat Boy,
Mm-hmm.
because Super Meat Boy has like all the control kind of thing. It has, you know, and everything, but it lacks different kinds of jumps, at
Mm-hmm.
least as far as I can remember.
Yep.
Um, and like the, you know, and I, where Mario 64, was, you still had control, but it was not 100% control over where
Mm-hmm.
you landed and whatnot. You could still, manipulate it, but, physics would still push you in the direction that you were going. But at the same time, you had the back flip, the triple front flip, I can't even remember all the jumps it had, but it had like just so many. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had that side,
The side
what
flip.
side like somersault flip
Mm-hmm.
thing, and then there was the like the what was it, the Z jump or something, where you would squat down and then you would jump
Long
really
jump.
far.
Yep.
Yeah, and there was a whole bunch of others that I am not remembering at the moment, and I just loved how much variety was there. And, you know, there was still control, but it was not like just complete control because there was still, simulated physics going on in there that would, carry momentum and stuff like that. But it was, you had moves where you could, negate momentum really quickly, where you did that, quick turn and then you go, kind of thing.
Yep. And like with Super Meat Boy and the N series, they're both what we would kind of call more like realistic physics when it comes to their platforming. That every bit of the momentum and velocity of your character is taken into account as you're making these jumps. And on one end, it really allows you to do a lot of variety in terms of micro adjustments and challenging the player. But on the other hand, it really limits what you can do mechanics wise. And we could even see in a similar way the issue between, Mario versus Sonic. Sonic had a very advanced, compared to Mario, physics system for how Sonic would behave, run, jump, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem that it faced was how do you design interesting obstacles around that? And the platforming in Sonic just never really competed on the same level as Mario, would you say?
I don't know about competing. I think that's kind of the wrong terminology because, like, I think the games competed against each other.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a very different kind of platforming because it was more. platforming to explore rather than platforming to platform kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where Sonic was, more about speed and less about the actual platforming, but you could do the platforming to discover new areas, exploration, and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So, like, they're very different kinds of platformers between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, where Mario is definitely more, you've got to make the jump and you've got to do it right kind of thing. Where Sonic is more, you can explore around, you can go really fast, and at your own,
Mm-hmm.
risk kind of thing and all kinds of other stuff. And there's still platforming that's required, but it's not to the same level that Mario is kind of thing.
But I would argue that when Sonic does try to get harder and they start introducing more specific jumping and more specific obstacles, it becomes more frustrating to play compared to Mario. Like,
That's because of the speed involved.
yeah, and exactly. And not only that, but because Sonic is more built on that physics and the momentum, it's not the same as, Mario walks to the right and jumps. Sonic, he starts walking, he builds up that speed. So if you are in a complete stationary position, you're trying to make a jump, it becomes a lot harder. You need to get that momentum going.
Well,
But,
some of the Mario games are like that, like Mario 3.
yeah,
But they're not to the same
exactly.
extreme that Sonic is, because Sonic has extreme speed. You gotta go fast kind of thing. And the speed of Sonic is both Sonic's greatest strength as well as
Mm-hmm.
his greatest weakness at the same time.
Oh, yes. Yep, and that has been a problem that has plagued the Sonic games for, what now, over 40 years. That the speed, they've never been able to get that equilibrium between super speedy Sonic gameplay and interesting challenges, mechanics, and, making the platforming feel anywhere near as good as Mario. And this is.
I think I just came up with a way to do it though.
Hmm?
Is the problem is that Sonic has that Mario doesn't is the speed.
Mm-hmm.
And the speed basically shortens your viewpoint in front of you. So
Mm-hmm.
if they had a mini map on Sonic,
Yeah.
you could see way farther ahead of you what's coming on the mini map as you're running, balls to the wall really
Mm-hmm.
fast. And I think that would actually fix a
Yeah.
lot of their issues.
Mm-hmm. And when Sonic made the transition to 3D, the developers also suffered in terms of, again, trying to translate that speed into a 3D platformer. Because, again, if you've played any of the Sonic 3D games, their levels are very stretched out because they're trying to give that illusion of speed. But the problem is that speed makes it very hard to gauge when you're trying to make very precise platforming, and two, it's a lot of dead time in those levels. It's like I do a little bit of platforming, then I spend 15 seconds watching Sonic, zip zoom all around. Then I do a little bit more platforming, then I watch him zip zoom around for another 20 seconds, and it just never felt good to control. And that's kind of the mission statement for this entire cast. That if you want to make a good platformer, 2D, 3D, whatever, it has to feel good to control. Because if it doesn't, it's basically like trying to build a house on a foundation where, two of those foundational pillars have been completely smashed or cut.
Mm-hmm.
And what Shark said a second ago about having a mini map and the camera, that's another very important point. And this is one of those topics that I could spend a few hours talking about platformers. It's why I spend a lot of that time in my book talking about platformers. The
What book?
What?
What book?
Game design deep dive platformers. So, if you want to know more about platformers, buy that book. There's our shameless, one of many shameless plugs for our stream this week. But
Yeah.
camera control, it is the bane of every developer who's had to make a 2D or 3D platformer, because getting that camera right is so much harder than what you may think it is. And there are several different aspects of this. If we're focusing specifically on 2D platforming, how the character is positioned on screen and what the player can see coming up is crucial. So, again, pretend that my lovely little webcam here is a game screen. Most games will start your character in the middle. So, I start walking to the right, I start walking to the left, and we're doing platforming like that. But at this position, if I am running full tilt in this direction, most likely I will not be able to actually process an obstacle that's coming. This was the problem that Sonic had. That when you start running in Sonic, it actually pushes Sonic more towards this side. And again, in order to give that illusion of speed. Hi, Mike. But the problem is that if I am right here, and let's say there's a spike coming off screen, there is no way, if you're playing this game for the first time or casually, you're going to be able to process that spike coming at you before it hits Sonic and does damage.
Yeah, which would be where a minimap would come in very, very handy.
Yeah. And this is why, as a little trick to get around that, for most platformers, if you're running full tilt in this direction, they will pan the camera so that my character will be maybe here on the screen. Or if I'm running full tilt that way, I will be over here. Because they want to give you as much distance between what is coming at the player to where the player is on screen.
Yeah, because when you're going fast,
Mm-hmm.
you gotta go fast. By the way,
Yep.
When you're going fast, you can't. Everything that's behind you is pretty much irrelevant,
Yep.
and everything in front of you is extremely important. So you need to move the camera on the character to where you can see a lot of that forward space, and like the more speed you have, the more you need to see what's in front of you, kind of thing.
Yep.
Which another thing they could do in the Sonic games is zoom the camera out the faster you go.
Yep.
Because make Sonic smaller. Although there would be a limit to how small you'd want to make him.
Yeah. And you have to be really careful with how that transitions, zooming in and out. Because that can become very disorienting if it's very fast.
Yeah.
And one thing that we didn't touch on yet that is also important is not only panning the camera left and right, but up and down as well. Because there are plenty of platformers that have what we call blind jumps. That is, I have to make a jump and I'm up here, and there's a platform way down here, and I can't see that platform because the camera is only showing me maybe this much of real estate. So I jump, and I don't know where that platform is, and most likely you're going to completely miss that platform on your first jump because you're not going to see it. Or the other option, this is something that, again, if you're a platformer player, you know what I'm about to talk about, is, again, let's imagine my webcam is the camera. And I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to jump, and I'm jumping off camera, and I still need to direct where my character is going to land without being able to see where they are on screen.
Yeah, I know Sonic, the original Sonic, had a good mechanic where, like, if you hold down kind of thing, Sonic would actually pan the camera down, and you would look below you, or hold up, and it would pan it up.
Mm-hmm. And if you're going to do jumps that are going to change your elevation at that extreme, you either need to pan the camera, or interestingly, we're even seeing Kaizo players adopt this, that they will do coin trails. Now, some of them will do coin trails to troll you. They'll say, follow these coins, and you're falling into a spike pit. But you need to give the player a way of knowing what's coming up, because otherwise, you're just platforming in the dark. And, that's easy to do, right, from our Ultimate Chicken Horse play.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many times in Ultimate Chicken Horse when I was platforming and it's like, I'm not even on the screen,
Yeah.
It's just like, I thought I was dead and I was still jumping and everything, and then turns out I was alive somehow.
Yep.
Just off camera.
And you want to keep the player's character on camera at all times. But more specifically, if we're talking about 3D platforming, you need to give the player the ability to judge perception, or judge what plane they're on. And this brings up the ever popular topic of shadows. If you're going to do 3D platforming, you need a shadow. And the shadows, again, I can't really show 3D on my camera here like this, but if I'm jumping, I need to see where my character is going to land. And that requires not only the shadow placement, but also the angle of the camera that you're showing the player. Because I've played 3D platformers where I can't see where I'm jumping. I literally cannot gauge the depth of field because there's no shadow. And if there is none and the camera's not right, the 3D platform becomes next to impossible to make those leaps safely.
So let me get this straight. You cannot demonstrate 3D platforming with shadows on your camera in a real 3D environment with real shadows.
Unless I start getting up and we do some camera work here. I'll be a Lakitu from Super Mario 64.
But the shadows are also, I think, important in 2D, but they're nowhere near as important as they are in 3D, because they're your game is kind of dead if there's not a shadow in a 3D one, but you can live without a shadow in a 2D platformer, but it would always come in handy. But the 3D is it's a must-have. You have to have that shadow.
Yep.
If you don't have that shadow, you're screwed. Because when you're following, in a 2D, you're seeing the live trajectory of your character, kind of thing, and that's the reason why you can deal without a shadow, because you can see the trajectory and you can predict where you're going to land, kind of thing. In a 3D one, you're looking at it from behind, so all you're doing is seeing the character go up and down, rather than you're not seeing any kind of trajectory or anything like that. Hence, there is no real depth perception, kind of thing, because you're playing the game on a flat screen. It's not like the screen inside of the screen is an actual real 3D environment. It's simulated. And your eyes cannot really fully discern 3D environments, simulated 3D environments, without the simulated shadows to come with them.
Unless you get, inserted into the video game yourself, you get sucked into the game and you're actually doing the platforming, then you can gauge that perception really easily.
You mean like the Mario Brothers 1 movie?
Yep.
With the dinosaur Bowser?
Yeah.
/ Max Headpain?
Yeah. You mean Max Headroom?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And another thing that we didn't touch on that is universal between whatever platform you're trying to do is again, how much leeway do you give the player in terms of their jumps? Because this is a huge impact when it comes to difficulty. I've played platformers where if I have to make a jump that's like, let's say the gap is this wide between my hands, this is exactly, my character can jump maybe this far. So if I am not like on the right pixel, or about to fall off the edge and not make that jump, I'm not going to be able to make that distance. And you need to be really careful when it comes to platforming, because the more that you require precision, the harder the platforming is going to be, and that's going to cut out your potential fan base. Many platformers will give you kind of mulligans or additional ways to kind of circumvent that. The ever popular, hang on edge power. Maybe you can jump and do like a little flutter that, slows down your jumping or your descending. Maybe. Yeah. But if you make it too difficult, then we start getting into Kaizo levels of difficulty.
Yeah. Another thing they do, which just is good for pretty much all platformers kind of thing, is allowing input lag, because like there's all kinds of latency between the game, your device that you're playing on, whether it's console, PC, whatever it is, the controller / keyboard. Hopefully you're not playing a keyboard on a platformer, but if you want to, go for it. But the just as a developer, make sure you have controller support and configurable. But there's not just that, but there's also latency inside of your the human body. There's from the screen into the eyes into the brain, has the brain process it, send the synapse to your hands so that you can then push a button, and then button pressing time, and that time is not a short time. Professional drag racers, and I was used to be really into drag racing and whatnot, still want to be into it. And when I say that, I mean I was doing the racing myself. And the thing is like the normal tree is set up to, and we call it Christmas tree. That's the thing with all the lights that, judge your reaction time. Your normal reaction time for a normal tree, as long as you weren't doing a professional tree, was set up to be, your reaction time was set up to be 0.5 seconds. So like the perfect timing for your reaction was a half a second, so like, and then when you talk about the pro tree, that's 0.4 seconds. But like, the fact is when you have stuff like that, you have that reaction time and everything that humans have built into them. So you need to kind of account for that. And what a lot of developers do, and it's, universally accepted kind of thing, is even after you leave the ground kind of thing and you start falling, there's this short time where it'll still allow you to jump.
And a lot of like, there's not really like the quote unquote technical term for it. Some people call it coyote jumping, named after Wile E. Coyote, when he can still run before he realizes he's off the cliff, and then falls down at that point. But you need to, depending upon, again, the difficulty of what you're aiming for in terms of your platforming, you want to consider having these little accommodations or, emergency skills or abilities that can help your jumping. Now, you gotta be careful with that, because if you don't want to too often make the game rely on them. So here's an infamous example. There are plenty of older platformers that require you to jump and you have to like hang on the edge and then pull yourself up. But some of these games, they make the hitbox for this edge super specific. So there are cases where you'll jump, your character will hit the edge, but they hit the right angle, and they'll fall down. Like, it becomes a nightmare. I remember Stargate for the Super Nintendo had that issue. The Flintstones game that I recently played, not the classic Hanna-Barbera Flintstones, but the one based off the movie Flintstones, was a nightmare in terms of getting that hanging to work.
Yeah, and that's a hitbox issue, where you don't have big enough hitboxes to, initiate the grab.
Mm-hmm.
And, hitbox collision is a very big thing,
Oh, yes.
And you definitely need to nail that, because, like, if you don't, nail your hitboxes, you want the hitboxes, like for enemies, inside of the enemies. You don't want them outside. Like if the enemy, if the enemy is like, I don't know, like if the enemy itself is 16 by 16 pixels kind of thing. But like, let's look at a Goomba, where like there's all this space in between its feet and its head kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, so what I'm sure Nintendo did was they made that space, the hitbox for the enemy, inside of the feet, so that every place where there's a hitbox, there was a pixel, and the spaces where there was not, where there was still enemy, but there was holes in there, they made it not a hitbox. And they probably actually, and they lowered the hitbox probably too a little bit, just to be within, certain equivalent distance, so that, the actual enemy of the Goomba had a much smaller hitbox when it came to hitting them as a enemy, but for jumping on them kind of thing, they probably did a lot bigger hitbox kind of thing to allow you to hit it, so like they probably did two different hitboxes.
Yeah, most likely.
One to avoid and one to hit.
Yeah. And a term that is used a lot to describe this is what's called a hurtbox. That is when, let's say, for instance, we have the spiky in Mario. That if Mario collides with that spiky any which side, it's going to hurt them. And we use the term hurtbox to define any time that if the player collides with this, it's going to do damage to them. Some games, they'll have it that, you touch an enemy at all, you're going to take damage. Other times, it could be that you only take damage if the enemy is actually doing an attack. So the attack itself has the hurt box. So like when Bowser is, flinging fireballs off screen, they're, trailing like that, there is a hitbox around this fireball that if it collides with Mario.
Just on the front of it.
Yeah. And like Shark said, you need to be really careful about how you define these hitboxes. There are games where the character will swing their sword. The sword will, they'll go through the attack, but even after the attack is done, the sword's hurtbox is still alive. I've played a lot of 2D action games and Souls-likes where I'll dodge the swing, and then as the sword is done, and it still hits me, even though it's not even being swung anymore.
Yeah, I don't like that. A lot of games, what they do is after the swing is done, the hurt box will disappear. And you definitely, to have a really good feeling platformer, you need to pay very special attention to being very generous on, the player hitting the enemy, and very generous towards the player on them not getting hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another term that a lot of people like to say is kind of like hitbox abuse or, hitbox manipulation. And what that simply means, again, is that if you know your character's hitbox, Mario has a very specific one. That there are some times where you'll need to stand or you'll have to jump at an obstacle that it hits Mario. Like the fire hits him, the spike hits him, whatever. But because it doesn't hit the exact pixel of the hitbox, Mario is safe from damage. And
the easiest way to think about it is The hit boxes and hurt boxes and all that are just little boxes on screen. And that is the actual game kind of thing. And then there's sprites overlaid on top of the hit boxes that are often bigger than the hit boxes, you know, or you know, bigger than the hurt boxes and smaller than the hit boxes. And those overlaid sprites are what you see that are attached to the hit boxes and hurt boxes, but they're not an exact representation of it.
Is it just shapes and boxes?
Yeah.
And again, the harder you make your platformer, one, you need to give the player as much control as possible, and two, you need to be very careful in terms of just how high you are willing to go in terms of that difficulty. Like I said, there are a lot of Kaizo games out there. And Kaizo platforming is very much built on you need to do 300 steps 100% perfectly. If you mess up one time anywhere, you're going to have to restart the whole thing.
And there's so many games that are... I would say Kaizo is not black and white. It's a shade of, you know, many shades of gray, you know. Like the most extreme Kaizo would be, you know, pure black, where the easiest platformer would be pure white, you know. And, you know, the one that's just completely boring and just a whole bunch of flat terrain kind of thing. But you know, like Mario would be somewhere in the gray kind of thing. You know, pretty much all games would be somewhere in the gray. But like, I would consider it, you know, like a bar somewhere around like the 60%. And I would consider everything on, you know, the 60% down to 0 kind of thing. That's a platformer, and everything that's 61 to 100 would be Kaizo kind of thing. And, you know, and Super Meat Boy gets over there on the Kaizo side. You know, it's you know, I would say Super Meat Boy's probably what 80, you know, or 70, somewhere in there, you know. And same thing with Celeste, probably somewhere in that area. You know, it's not full Kaizo, you know, but it's Kaizo adjacent, but you know, it's on the Kaizo side of the spectrum, you know,
like,
kind of thing.
Yeah, and like games like Celeste, like they are really like on that line of what like a mainstream Kaizo game could be. And again,
they're not on the far extreme, but they're on the Kaizo side.
Yeah,
they're on the Kaizo spectrum side of the spectrum rather than the platformer side of the spectrum.
And again, like it really depends on the audience that you're trying to aim for with your game. And that takes me to one topic or one part that we haven't talked fully about yet. And as a time check, we are about like 54 minutes in. So you think maybe another 15 minutes, give or take?
Probably.
Okay.
But before you move on to that, there's something I want to talk about Kaizos. In general, Kaizos, I think, is something you want to avoid because Kaizos, you're playing to the hardcore, and there's only a very limited audience in there, and that's going to limit any chance. That's going to kill any chance of like massive success, you know, with general consumers, and it's going to limit your chances of success. Period. You know, like because you're only dealing with the hardcore, and you know, depending on your connection, your marketing, and whatnot, you know, building something on the Kaizo side will potentially kill your game, you know, but it's not, you know, black and white, but like it is odds wise, it is not, it's lowering your odds. Anything on the Kaizo side of the spectrum is lowering your odds for commercial success, you know.
Yeah, and again, it depends on the audience that you're going for. If you're trying to make the ultimate Kaizo game, you can certainly do that, but do not expect it to sell anywhere near as good as something like Shovel Knight or a Mario or anything like that.
Ori.
Yeah.
You know, the big difference between a Kaizo and, you know, not mechanically, but like the big difference is the skill ceiling and the skill floor kind of thing. Where the skill floor and skill ceiling of a normal platformer are normally have the skill floor is normally pretty low. You know, the skill ceiling's normally pretty high. You know, when you're talking about a well-designed one anyway, you know. And then when you're talking about a Kaizo kind of thing, the skill floor is probably close to the ceiling of the regular platformer, and the skill ceiling is probably again close to the level of the skill ceiling of the other one, just, you know, a little bit higher. So it's a much narrower band, and when you narrow that band, you're narrowing the audience you can target.
Yeah, and as an additional point on that, having assist modes, you know, infinite jumping, bonus hits, stuff like that, it's not going to solve that problem.
No.
Because people who play platformers, most of them, if they feel frustrated with your game, they're going to quit. They're not going to feel the desire to play through the game with infinite jumping or infinite damage. While those modes can...
And all that just feels like a cheat mode.
Yeah. All that does, it may help people get into it, and there's certainly a case to have that, but if you design your game under the assumption that everyone's going to use the assist mode, you're kind of hurting your game's design. The assist mode, think of it as the last possible option. You don't want to make that, you know, something that everyone should just immediately turn to. Your game should be designed well enough that they shouldn't need that.
Yeah. The reason why I say that platformers would be better than a Kaizo is because tutorials. Because, you know, when you talk about onboarding a player kind of thing, you don't just, you know, you never run into an RPG or, you know, anything like that, or a roguelike besides the point where they're going to just, you know, kill you on purpose kind of thing at the beginning to show you that there's death, you know, but, you know, then they go to the real game after that. But, like, you know, outside of, like, you know, stuff like that, no game starts at, like, final boss territory of difficulty. You know, never do you know, start an RPG and then you fight a boss, you know, that is level 99, and right at the start, and you lost. Well, go grind for 99 levels and then come back and fight it. That would be horrible. And that's kind of what Kaizo does, you know. And the fact of having the lower skill floor, that allows people to transition their skills from, you know, from soft skills to, you know, medium, you know, low skills, and then to medium skills, and to medium high, and then to, you know, high. And they there's that progression kind of thing of onboarding through mechanics and, you know, practice and everything, where pretty much every Kaizo I've ever seen, you're starting on high to begin with, you know, if not, you know, medium high, and, you know, and it just, you know, gets more crazy from there.
And not only that, but in Kaizo games, because of how specific the obstacle design is, you're not really able to learn it as you play. Like in a good Mario game or a good platformer, the player's skill grows as they play. They become more accustomed to the physics, they know the mechanics, they get the obstacles, and they get better at the game. Because of Kaizo and how specific it is, every level is basically like restarting back at zero. Because you need to learn specifically what you're going to need to do in that level. So if you don't already have that super high skill floor that's required, there's no hope of you ever being a Kaizo game because
Yep.
it expects you to be at Grandmaster level from the word go. Whereas
Yep.
most platformers, they may save the Grandmaster challenge as the post optional. You cleared 100% of the game. Here's one final ordeal for you.
Yeah, but they still have it, and that's where I think that platformers have the advantage over
Kaizo.
Kaizo. Yeah, because Kaizo just gives you master level, and that's all they give you. Where platformers give you beginner, intermediate, skilled, advanced, and then master kind of thing. You still get the master that you get from the other one. You just get a lot more on top of it, and I just think that's better overall design.
Yep. And
it also appeals to a wider audience because the normal consumers kind of thing can get in there on the bottom level, and they can actually play and enjoy your game. Where they can't do that in the Kaizo, they will bounce off of it and quit. And maybe you'll really, if your game's really compelling, maybe they'll keep on going and advance their skills up to the level of the master kind of thing, and then get to the master level and beat it. Maybe they won't, maybe they'll quit before that, but maybe they still really enjoyed their game. Because like there's so many games that nobody beats kind of thing that or that not everybody beat it, because pretty much there's not very many games where people actually a high percentage of them actually beat it kind of thing. But there is a high percentage of games that people like that they didn't beat.
Oh yes. And player churn, as I talk about in my completion critique show, is very real. And if the player feels like they don't have a way to proceed, they're confused, or they just don't have the skill level for it, they're going to stop playing.
And if that's within 2 hours, they're probably going to refund. Specifically, and especially if it's in the first 10-15 minutes, they're almost guaranteed to refund.
Because again, a lot of people don't want to feel like they're being punished by playing this game.
Yeah. And hello, Cycer and Frankie.
Yep. It is a tough balance in terms of how challenging you want to make a platformer, be it 2D or 3D. Because like we've said, it is easy to do the extremes. If you want to make a platformer that's just literally you walking from left to right, you can do that. If you want to make a platformer that, again, is like those super troll Mario Maker levels where it's, here's 100 of those, fire, wheels or fire lines that keep on going in, different patterns and direction, jump through it, you can do that. But
you could also do a hybrid of that. And it's something that we haven't really seen, but, at least I haven't seen. But a hybrid would be something that looks like a Kaizo, like the crazy troll Mario levels, but they're not hard. You know what I mean? They don't have a high skill ceiling where they have the big elaborate, craziness, but they're not big elaborate hard.
There is a subcategory of Mario Maker levels that they do just that. That it is just here's a bunch of craziness going on. All you have to do is hold right and jump. And the level itself just carries you through it from beginning to end. Now, of course, that takes...
talking about that easy, but yeah, stuff like that.
But that takes a lot of skill.
I was talking about something more like a normal Mario difficulty that still had that level of craziness.
Yeah. And we've seen, as another interesting point about platformers, is that because they're so focused on the obstacle design, you can develop levels with personality to them, I think, far easier than some of the other genres out there. And that goes into a lot of the pacing and design of a good platformer. That A level of platformer should be only as long as you can get interesting mileage out of whatever mechanic or things you want to do. If you want to make an ice level, you can make an ice level. But you can't make a 5 hour long level that's just players slipping and sliding across platforms.
Yeah. You generally want to keep your levels fairly short, period.
Yeah.
But you can have, multiple levels in a world kind of thing, But
Like,
you don't want to fatigue the player by
yeah.
having levels too long. We've seen platformers with, 5, 10, 15, 20-minute levels, and it's just like,
Ugh.
no,
Yeah, and you also, it's better to have focus levels than kitchen sink levels,
hmm
where, this is going to be my fiery, icy, watery, homing missile, reverse gravity, light flickering, triple jumping, anti grav, super infinite jumping level. If you're
But that
going,
might be good for the final boss,
maybe, but
but not for any normal level though.
yeah, it's better to have, okay, this is my fire level, this is my anti grav level, this is my ice level, and get as much mileage out of that specific mechanic or obstacle, and then move on to the next thing. And
hmm
you don't want to fill your game with 100 levels that are just the same thing. Maybe instead of jumping with a green floor, you're doing the same jump, but it's a yellow floor or a red floor. People want quality, and good 2D and 3D level design in this capacity is certainly an art form.
Yeah, you definitely need to hire a good artist to get your world design and everything in there properly, because like, each area needs to be uniquely identifiable.
Mm-hmm.
That each level needs to have its own character kind of thing. Now that doesn't mean you can't use sprites or anything, because you absolutely can and probably should use
Mm-hmm.
tiles and stuff like that. But like, you every world, every level needs to feel like its own thing. It needs to, like, you can, despite, Mario level 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4 having the same exact tiles kind of thing, they
Mm-hmm.
all feel uniquely their same, because you can, anybody who's played that can think about to each one of those levels, and you're like, yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
a completely totally different level. And despite it using the same tiles, using the same kind of level of skill and tactics kind of thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and as a very interesting point, that a lot of the Kaizo developers, especially the Mario games, have done a really great job of exploring the mechanical variety there is in Mario. Be it, insane underwater levels. Uh, I was watching the run of Grand Poo World too, and they do some very innovative things with, again, Mario's basic mechanics. And if you're developing a 2D or 3D platformer, don't be afraid to experiment, especially if you're trying to make something that hasn't been seen before. Like, if you want to have, like, an underwater section where, the water could be closed, like, reverse directions in certain pools of it, you can certainly do that. Don't be afraid to tweak or have elements that change those basic mechanics in unique ways, and then explore that line further. Because, again, you want to get as much mileage out of all your mechanics and all your obstacles as you can. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a platformer that maybe it could be 5 hours long, but there's maybe only 40 minutes of actual content.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that you can do with a single mechanic, in a platformer specifically, that can just really, elevate it. If you think about the water direction kind of thing, the gushing water, you can have that, and set it on a water level to where it actually comes up to the top of the water, and you would use this as like if you do it right kind of thing. You can use it to boost yourself, jump out of the water and onto a land section, or like you boost out and you jump over a massive obstacle or
Yep.
anything else. There's all kinds of different things that you could do with just something simple like that, and you can really stretch it very, very far. And it's all about how you use it. But like, you can do the same thing in all games. It's just platformers really, really lend themselves to that to a large degree. But that is definitely something that, as in general game development, you want to be able to use your stuff as much as possible in different ways to provide even more variety with less workload.
Yeah, you don't want to spend, 6 months creating some crazy mechanic that you can only use for 10 seconds of your gameplay. You want to be very economical in terms of the mechanics and elements you put into your game, because you want to be able to reuse them in new and interesting ways. With Super Mario, Super Mario World is again another quintessential example of this. That it's not a game that gets, progressively difficult to the point of being a Kaizo game. What they do is they simply repurpose different obstacles and challenges in new and different ways. So, dodging spikes coming out of a wall, that is its own challenge. But let's say you're dodging spikes coming out of a wall while there's a bullet bill shooting at you from the left side of the screen. That's a way of combining these elements to create something new, but you're not needing to create brand new assets to get that new challenge.
But there's even more ways. The spikes could be attached and only come out, by an inch. They could be attached and they can come out by a good distance, or they could just shoot it across the screen like a projectile kind of thing. Or they can, shoot out like a projectile, nail into the wall on the other side, and then you could use it potentially as a ladder. There's all kinds of different things you could do with just that one aspect.
Yep. And again, it really comes down to the creativeness of the developers. And another aspect, and I know we're getting close to our time, there's one point I wanted to touch on very quickly. If you are doing puzzle platforming or adventure platforming, so these are games where you have to solve puzzles based on the player's ability to platform, or it's a more methodical kind of platforming. So this would be stuff like the Oddworld games, Blackthorn, Flashback, Out of This World. I know there are a few indie developers working on this kind of adventure platforming as well. Or Prince of Persia would probably be like the most famous example of this. This is a very weird line that we talk about when it comes to platforming. That you're trying to slow things down, you're trying to make things more methodical, but you need to be aware of that line when it becomes clunky to play. So if you've ever played one of these games where, like, you can't just run and stop. You run and then when you let go, your character, like, stumbles to a stop. Or they can't just run and then turn around. They have to do like a little animation before they actually start running the other direction. That if you make these windows so tight that if you aren't doing things perfectly precise and turn it almost like an adventure Kaizo game, they become very frustrating to play. There was a game that I showed off, I think, last summer or a little bit before that. It was like, you're escaping a prison while this, like, rat monster was chasing after you. And it required so much precision or, so much clunkiness of that kind of platforming that it just began to get frustrating to play.
Yeah, but there are good examples specifically of that same thing, specifically in Mario. Just they did it to a good degree, to where like in Mario 64, you run, and then you put the other direction, and then you go and you slide a little bit, and before he turns around, and well, he turns around and slides, and then he starts coming back that other direction. But you can, as you're sliding kind of thing, you can hit another button and do that backflip right there and immediately stop right there at that exact point, where you land from your backflip kind of thing. And there's definitely, good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. And it's all about, doing it in a good way that feels good and it's not clunky.
Yeah.
You know,
You can make things methodical. You can make the player have to take their time with their jumps. You don't want it to feel clunky. Like when I played that Lester the Unlikely game, like 2 weeks ago, that would be a poor example in terms of like how clunky that feels.
Yeah, if you're going to make it methodical, you probably don't want to put any kind of momentum based controls in your jumping, because then that kind of, it's like, oh, now I need to make this methodical jump. I need to run back, gain a running platform, and then run and jump. And, it would feel better in general just to jump at that point rather than having to run back and get momentum, and it feels less good that way,
Yeah.
And there's one other point that we have not talked about, but we have talked about roundabout ways, is the physics-based platformer. And physics-based platformers have that extra degree of being out of control because of physics is in control to a point. I'm unsure of that game, Antoine. Do you know it, Josh?
What's your thoughts on Dangerous State? No, I'm not familiar with that. Let me see if I can look it up really fast.
But on the physics platformers, the physics itself has control over items in the world, as well as your character, as well as you have, control over both of them. But the control is split rather than, equal. And I think the most important part of a physics-based platform is nothing can be precision.
Yeah, you gotta be, again, unless you can give the player like complete micro adjustments, like in Super Meat Boy, and even then, that can be very hard to land precisely on. It was one of the reasons why, and again, like another interesting aspect that kind of is another mission statement of or the theme of our cast this week. Every platformer is different. And again, you can watch somebody play 20 different platformers. It may look like they're doing the same exact thing on each one, but it could be demonstrably different. If you like, here's a good example. If you ever want to study that difference, play Super Meat Boy and then go play The End Is Nigh. They both look almost exactly alike. They're both designed by Emmett McMillan. They're completely different in terms of their platforming physics and the platforming design or the obstacle design of them.
But for the non-masochists, which two games would you recommend them play?
If we're talking about trying to see the difference, well, I guess one easy thing would be Super Mario Brothers 3 and Super Mario World. Two Mario games, two completely different forms of physics, and two completely different forms of environmental design.
Yeah, I loved Mario 3. Couldn't get into Super Mario World.
Yep. And again, that is what we've talked about in terms of the difficulty in making a good platformer. And why feel is so important. If all you're doing is watching footage of other people playing platformers, you will never learn game feel from that.
Yeah.
You have to play them.
Yeah. There are certain things you can learn from watching and certain things you can't. And feel is one of the ones that you really can't learn without playing it. I mean, if you're really, really good at reading it, you can get an idea for feel, but you can't get the feel. You know,
Yeah.
like if I watch Josh really close, I can be like, you just, it looked like you were sliding kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
and not stopping, and you looked like you were trying to stop kind of thing. But that's about all you can get. You can get like, you know, the perceived lack of control, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. And and a few other aspects, but you cannot get the full image without actually playing them.
Yeah, it would be like trying to learn the differences between playing Super Mario Brothers and insert LJN platformer, and trying to read the differences just by watching footage.
Yeah. And
Or
even as a, like to get that little bit of stuff that you can actually read,
Mhm.
you have to be pretty dang skilled at reading, you know,
Yeah,
game design from games to even get anything from it
and if
at
you,
all. So like in general, when you're talking about game feel, hands on is pretty much the only way. But there's many games genres that
yeah,
don't really depend on that.
yeah,
Like anything turn based.
oh yes, but if you really want to see pain in terms of 2D platforming physics, play The Simpsons Bart versus the Space Mutants. If you want some really like janky platforming you have to do in that game.
Hmm.
And I guess again we're kind of getting a little bit late here, but one final point I do want to touch on, especially because it has to do with platforming, is that if you are combining platforming with another mechanic or another system, again, puzzle platforming, let's say shooter with platformer, you need to be aware of where do you split the difficulty. Is it going to be more platforming focus? Is it going to be more puzzle or shooter or whatever focus? And the reason why I say this is that the more emphasis you put on the platforming, you need to have less. There has to be, somebody needs to get the short end of the stick. You don't want to make a brain melting, you're going to need to be immense to solve these puzzles. But at the same time, you also need to be Grandmaster Kaizo player in order to play this game. Because
Which is the risk of combining genres.
Yep.
You need to have a main genre that you're focusing on, and then the other one is a subgenre. Because
Yeah.
like when you have two main genres, it's almost always going to end up bad.
Yeah. And this is why most games that do like storytelling in platformers, stuff like Thomas Was Alone, for instance, that the platforming in that game is not on the difficult side, but it's being manipulated by the puzzling aspect. Which character do you move around, how you do that. And so while these games aren't the hardest for platformer fans, it's that inclusion of the puzzle aspect that kind of pushes it in its own direction. And again, I am sure he could have made the platforming, super precise, super difficult, but then that would get in the way of the puzzle solving and the story they're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. When your main focus is storytelling kind of thing, you don't want to get in the way of that. You don't want to block people from getting to more story because they need to get good at jumping kind of thing. You need to have the platforming be more lax kind of thing so that they can progress through the story easier.
Yeah, and
Because the when the focus is on the story, then you need to focus as a developer getting players through the story, not preventing them from getting through the story.
and again, to build on that, even if you are focusing on story, game feel still matters
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it doesn't matter if you are trying to tell the most heartfelt story that will make people cry if controlling the
Everything is
character.
jank.
Yeah. And again, I could spend another like hour or two on this topic alone if people really want me to like get started. We haven't really begun
But
yet.
but if you're focusing on story, you want that skill floor to be very, very low.
But there still has to be mechanical interaction there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And this is why, if you're trying to make action based gameplay, 2D platforming, hack and slash, first person shooter, whatever, you need to play these games when you're doing research because you have to get that feel right.
Yeah, there's another aspect to this is there's not only the main genre and subgenre, there's elements kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if you're doing a story-based puzzle game with elements of platforming, then game feel is nowhere near as much. Control, platformer feel is no longer really all that important because your focus is on the story and on the puzzle kind of thing. And then just every once in a while, maybe once or twice per, every so often kind of thing, you do platforming kind of thing. You still need some good feel in there, but it's nowhere near as important because you're barely doing it. And, so the more you're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
the more you're doing an action kind of thing, the more the better it needs to feel. The better it needs to be involved. Because this is going off topic, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason why we talk about UI being and UX design being so important in
Mm-hmm.
every game because the fact is UI and UX is something that you're interacting with all the time. And if that's off-putting, then you're interacting with
Mm-hmm.
something off-putting so many times. Now,
Yep.
if you're only jumping, once every, 10, 15 minutes, then the feel of the jump really doesn't matter all that much,
Yeah.
But if you're jumping every 3 seconds kind of thing, 10 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
the feel of that jump is so, so important. So be
Mm-hmm.
sure you know where your focus is. Be sure you know how much of something you're going to do. And the more you're going to do that something, make sure the better it feels.
Mm-hmm. And again, you have to be able to read that mark and know who you're aiming for in terms of your platforming. And again, we'll probably be returning to that comment for every genre we're going to talk about in the series. But like there was that game we played, a Blue Fire, which was like this super difficult 3D platformer. And like there were cases where they were having me to make jumps, and there was no way for me to actually gauge the perspective of where I was supposed to land. And yes, that makes it hard, but it makes it frustrating as well. And people don't want to be frustrated by your design.
Yeah, frustrating is what you want to avoid in literally every game design.
Mm-hmm.
Every game that you make, you want to avoid frustration because it is so easy to make a platformer that is extremely hard
Mm-hmm.
and extremely frustrating. That is like the easiest thing you could possibly do.
Yep.
And it's what we see a lot of times from rookie, newbie, developers kind of thing. Somebody who just, makes it very hard and very frustrating, because actually the easier the game is to beat, generally the harder it is to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And the less frustrating a game is, the harder it is to make it. So it takes skilled game developers to make easier, less frustrating games. So,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people think it's the inverse of that. The harder it is, the more work it takes. It's not. It's actually the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to get doing all the stuff that makes it less frustrating and easier means that you have to take into consideration all the facts, all the things that makes humans human kind of thing, and you've got to adjust for them and sync to them and calibrate and all these other words that are around just reforming how something is designed kind of thing. Like if you were just to think in a general sense kind of thing, if you look at a shovel kind of thing and the handle has just a flat plastic covering kind of thing that's really hard kind of thing. That's really hard, but it's super easy to do. Just put a layer of plastic over it, that's smooth, and you're done. But to make the handle that is comfortable, that forms to your hand and everything, is so much easier to hold and less frustrating, less blisters, less a lot of things kind of thing. Things that are made for the human hand take so much more engineering and thinking around the human condition, where the fingers will interlock, where each thing will be placed. And it is so much harder to design something that is less frustrating and easier to use than it is something hard to use.
Yep, definitely. And it's why you have to give the player as much control as you can over their character when you're doing good action-based design. Because we've seen games where, you just tap the A button to jump, the character jumps like 30 feet in that direction. Or, I'm just trying to walk over to an edge, and then, my character does like a dive roll instead.
Yeah.
Because we've never done that in a open world game, right? Or an Assassin's Creed. But we are getting off a little bit off topic, and I think this is a good point to wrap things up for this week's show. Do we have what we have set for next week's genre yet, Shark, or do we have to go back to our list?
We do have something set up. So next week's podcast will be about 2D action, 3D action games, and Souls games. Should be a very interesting one.
Oh, yes. What is a Souls like?
What is an action game?
Oh, yeah, and there's a lot that I can talk about there. I do want to do a book about action design at some point, too. So we'll see. But
will you get good?
Don't know. You'll have to tune in next week. But we're going to wrap things up here for this week's show. So thank you, everybody, for watching this live or recorded. If you like to follow us, you'll find all the information and links in our respective descriptions.
Yeah, and if you want to specifically check out my game, Neon Continuum, that I'm currently working on, which is a grid-based strategy tactical CCG that's inspired by Triple Triad and Magic the Gathering, join the Discord. We play it once a month when we have a new build, at least generally once a month, and we should it's very interesting, very sci-fi themed, got a core of cyberpunk, very interesting. Join the Discord and check it out.
Is it a first-person shooter too?
Oh yeah, it's every genre. It's every genre rolled into one. It's all the genres.
So, if you want to catch these shows live, we do them Sundays at 4 p.m. ET, as well as some of the other streams we do here on the Game Wisdom channel on days at 4 p.m., which I'll announce them as we have them coming up.
Yep.
So, do all the liking and subscribing people tell you to do. And, as always, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, take care.